You've probably shot with 2 cameras before. I do often on many of my projects. I have this thing where I like to shoot with an Alexa, and then I can't afford to shoot with more than one Alexa, so I'll throw in a bunch of Sony cameras. Case in point, in this latest feature-length documentary I'm working on, where we had the pleasure of interviewing Chris Williamson as one of the characters for it, we shot with an Alexa as our main camera, and then we had a Sony with a crazy old Soviet Helios lens. And we're gonna match that today. We're gonna give you 3 top-level points of how to go through that. Cinematographer Nick Pilecki here is gonna crack open Resolve, show you all the nodes he's used. But if you want the full breakdown, like we did like a 40-minute tutorial of each step, each setting, going through the parades, we have a link below. You can actually watch that video. We're gifting you a full tutorial from the Cinematic Eye. This is our cinematography course with over 70 videos, over 40 hours of instructional videos about cinematography. This is the most in-depth cinematography course you'll get. More on that later, but let's jump into this, Nick. One quick thing, as always, we're doing a camera giveaway, but this one is really special. It's the Blackmagic Pyxis 6K. We can't even get our hands on it yet, but we do have our order on it, and we're gonna be giving one away. If you wanna find out more about that, go to our Instagram, make sure you're following this channel, and go look for this post and follow the instructions there. Giving away a Blackmagic camera to celebrate the doors opening for AOD. Don't miss this chance to win this camera. You voted for it, you wanted this camera. I haven't even used it yet. I hope it's good. So here we are. Our first point is you want to find your master camera and color to that. In this case, we chose the Alexa because this is our A cam and it is going to be inherently the nicest shot.
Yeah, so here we have our A cam, which we're choosing as our master, that we're kind of saying like, let's set our look here, balance to this. So kind of like without getting into the nitty gritty, we have a 709 conversion here, which is our color space transform. And then downstream of that, we kind of have a little bit of exposure fix with HDR, and then a primary kind of like just pulling back our highlights a bit, and then taking some of the redness in the skin tone there, probably more noticeable in the vector scope, but we're just shifting those red hues to more of an orange, so they're not gunking out, and that's happening in our hue versus hue right here. So this is kind of like our starting point to where we're gonna take our second camera.
So once you've chosen your master camera and find the color is in a world that you like, we move on to point number 2, which is start with contrast, then move to color. And kind of the process Nick has explained to me is you wanna start with your luminance and contrast, move to your white balance, then go into saturation and skin tone. And so you can pull up our full nodes here for that FX6.
Yeah, so first part I would go on your B camera or your secondary camera is find a section of the clip that you're like, this could likely make the edit. If you're balancing to a section where the camera's at a weird angle, your values will be different. It's a losing battle. So pick a frame that you're like, oh, well, this looks good. This likely will make the edit. That's a good point to balance to.
So we chose this frame because it's not too flared out. We did have that 1200 aperture in the background there, which sometimes gave it a really big flare wash with the Helios. But I like this, good contrast values. He's nicely framed there with the wall. It's likely a shot that I would use from the interview.
You can see here that if I disable all the work before and I just have the conversion LUT, that the 2 shots would never really, I think in a realistic world, no one would ever say that those 2 should live side by side.
Let's go through each node that you've added on quickly here.
So, as we said, I like to start going big to small. So we're gonna be doing kind of our luminance, contrast, and primaries first. So what we've done here is we have our HDR palette, which is a feature here that you can select the gamma. Here we have S-Log3 picked, and we're kind of peeling back our highlights and our exposure. Now you can see when I add the primary, which is our kind of contrast ratios and black point, that's doing a lot of like the heavy lifting of getting into the world of like, oh, the face is looking good. So within that one node.
You already can see that the shadow side on his face, when you go back to the Alexa, it's matching kind of similar values, but
yes,
we still haven't landed on the same color. Our contrast is getting into a similar world, but now we want to start moving into saturation and all that. Which brings up point 3, scope and wipe often.
Sometimes when I wipe, I'll wipe and I'll wipe and I'll wipe and I'll wipe 100 times.
This is not medical advice, but what we mean is get your scopes up and wipe between the cameras often to see if you're moving into that.
It's like I'm wiping a marker or something.
The wipe is kind of you eyeballing it. You can't just eyeball it because you also want the data, which you're gonna get from your RGB parades and also get from your vector scope. So Nick has those scopes up in the corner, and that's when we get into our saturation tab, you're gonna start trying to match those.
Yep, so now we're gonna focus a little bit more on the color. And as you can see in our vector scope, if we toggle between the 2, Our Arri is sitting a little more neutral to warmish here, where Sony is a little bit more on the cooler, kind of like magenta purpley side. Contrast and luminance wise, we're sitting in a good spot. So we're gonna take saturation, and here, just in our primaries, we dialed that back a bit so the greens and the skins don't have like those red spikes or that kind of video-y green there. And then we're doing our white balance in our offset right here.
Wow, that's now starting to feel, so show us the scope and the wipe there as well.
So the biggest thing with the offset is you're seeing the actual vector scope shift from a more blue cyany place to shifting to more of a neutral white and warm place. So now, once again, when we do the wipe, now it's sitting very much in a world where it's like, oh, well, these two actually could cut in a feature, and I don't think your viewer would be distracted. Yeah,
this is actually now getting a much matched. Just quickly, how did you change that white balance?
So I did that in the primary wheels here with the offset. So the offset is kind of like your global change. So you're not selecting your highlights, midtones, or shadows. You're taking your whole image and you're shifting it in a certain tonal range. And I like that better than the temperature or tint slider, because you actually get to move it in a 360 wheel space, whereas your temperature and tint only move in 2 axes at a time. So you get a little bit more control by shifting this and moving it over.
So from there, I see a ton of more nodes, which we go into all the minutia and detail for that in the full video, but just giving a quick high level, what have you done with these?
So after we kind of have like our broad strokes ready to go, here I have a little skin corrector, which takes that kind of redness, magenta that always seeps in out. And then I have a little vignette to kind of pop the face up and bring the outside, like our highlights, down.
Show me that on off. It's very subtle.
It's very subtle, but you're ever so slightly just like telling the eye,
you're kind of
look there.
You can see some of the information in that top corner is being retrieved.
And then for our less saturated points, I'm taking out some of the saturation, like the things that should be white. Once again, these are all subtle. And then
so like you're saying, this brick wall in the background, there shouldn't be much saturation in that, because if we go back to the Alexa shot,
like those are sitting a little more neutral white.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I'm kind of targeting those and being like, all right, well, let's not have a heavy color cast on our white sections of our scene. Like let's tame those back as much as we can before the codec starts to break.
Also, that helps your main character pop out.
Yeah,
because he will have the most saturation, where why do you need a white wall needing saturation?
Yep, and then just a further extension of that is kind of a key that selects for those neutral points and then taking a bit of the saturation out. So you're just like taking a bit of that green gunk here, a little bit of that warmth, and just ever so slightly, once again, 5–10% peeling it back. But it's the totality of all these little details after we've done like the first large, like 80% of our work was done in these first kind of 4 nodes. And then these ones are like the 5 to 10 to 20% that kind of like tie it all together, to the point where you can have your editor cutting things together and you're like, great, I'm not distracted and I can watch this for the story it is.
There you go. So that's the quick high-level approach to matching cameras. Remember, always start with your master shot, then start with your contrast, moving into your color, white balance, saturation, skin tones. And while you're doing that, make sure to be wiping and scoping as often as you can. Check out the vector scope, check out the RGB parade, and also make sure that you're wiping between your A and B camera from your master to the camera that you're trying to match, just so that you know if you're actually moving into a world that will be pleasing to the cut. Awesome, thank you for this, Nick. If you guys want more information, we actually have Nick in the cinematic eye. He's in a ton of the videos. We do full breakdowns. Today here in the office, we're shooting another 7 videos of different commercials and projects that he's worked on. We do full breakdowns. We give you all the lighting setups. The Cinematic Eye is the most in-depth cinematography course that you'll ever experience. And that is part of the Art of Documentary Academy. If you haven't heard of it before, AOD, that's our course and academy. We have 5 different courses, over 330 videos. Probably at the time of this recording, we'll actually be over 340. Dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of hours of content now, and plus a live community you get to be a part of, where we have live monthly calls every month. You get to interact with people from your city. We actually give you money if you're part of AOD to meet up with other filmmakers in your city who are part of AOD. We're passionate about you increasing your creativity, but we're also very passionate about you finding community and collaborators for your career. There's all the C's. Jump into our AOD. We're opening the doors up again, September 2024. Every few months you can join AOD, now's your chance. And we're gonna be having huge sales for the first 40 hours when the doors open for AOD. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you, Nick, for making my shots match, and we'll see you in the next one.